on, he can't take it.
Thank you. Harry Stronach, Akaroa Ratepayers and Residents Association.
Well, I see we've got the theme established already.
Yep.
Actually, I see in the infrastructure review that the government are running, it does talk about redrawing boundaries of local bodies. So that's an interesting thought, isn't it? So Akaroa, so to get to Akaroa from here, you drive through 60 or 70 kilometres of rural countryside. You know, you're out there in Selwyn district. It takes an hour or more. You get over the hill and you get to Akaroa, and what do you find? You find a bit of Christchurch City, the stuff that you have around here. Well, no, you don't. You know that you do not. You don't find some suburb that looks just like the neighbours next door. You find it a unique and distinct village community. It's got its own rural hinterland, serving its own farming base. It's a community with a heritage that's older and more diverse than Christchurch City. And it's got a tradition of independence and self-reliance. And the peninsula, 1,000 square kilometres of rural farmland, 5 times the size of the urban area at least. And the peninsula is busy turning itself into something else. It was hard-won farming land. You might think it was the wrong idea to sort of mill the trees and burn the bush and all that sort of thing. It was right. They thought it was right then. It looks wrong now. Anyway, it's regenerating. It's turning itself into something else. It's conservation, regeneration, pest control. Those are the topics of conversation. We don't talk about the Coxford harvest anymore out there. So people in the urban city seem to regard that process very favourably, but it's not clear to everybody here that that takes commitment and effort to keep that sort of thing going and to keep the heritage Akaroa going. It's a little bit of a struggle. If I was to suggest to a council staff member that there was a deliberate council policy to systematically dismantle local communities, I mean, they would obviously say that was a ridiculous suggestion. They would say our policy is to enhance communities. That's what it says in your documents. We promote resilient communities. We help communities to own their own future. Those are the words in the documents. It does say those things, but the reality on the ground is a bit different. If I was to put that suggestion to somebody on the streets of Akaroa, the answer would be more like this. Ever since the amalgamation in 2006, the City Council has been chipping away at the distinct identity of the peninsula and Akaroa communities. Not deliberately, but that's what happens. Steadily, step by step, you are destroying the individual identities in places that you simply do not understand and you don't seem able to understand. When I say you, obviously, I mean the council machine. There must be a template, somebody must have it in their drawer somewhere, in this building. There's a template for what a community should be like, and how it should act. And places that fail to conform, ones that don't identify with the template, they need to be moulded into shape by the council machine until they're an acceptable community. I mean, why on earth would you abolish the volunteer library service system, the system of volunteers?
Harry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I am, because the focus for today is the representation review.
Yes.
I know that there are all of these other subjects and we will be dealing with a number of them in the LTP process. But can you focus on whether you want to retain the separate identity for the Banks Peninsula ward, the subdivisions within that?
I was explaining why it's different and so forth. Okay, moving down the page, thank you. We need help to maintain our own identity, and in our recent sort of polling and so on, the approval rate of the council was very, very low. I mean, that's very unfortunate. We don't want it to be like that. We want to see some change from the council, but we also want assistance from the community board. The subject of the day is the representation review, as you quite rightly point out. You cast an eye over the consultation document and it looks outrageous. The representation level in the peninsula is something like 10 times what it might be in the city and so on. Why would that be? But we need all the representation that we can get. We need representation, in fact, that is more meaningful. We want councillors and board members who are dedicated to our area and can affect the decision making and the planning that ends up affecting our lives and our communities. we know it's hard for the elected members to affect what happens inside the council machine, but we need to work towards that and so on. So the reality is we've got a small and historic community that is struggling to keep its own identity. There's the onslaught of modern lifestyles and so on, and then there's the onslaught of the council machine. The standardisation, conformity, it comes across to us as mediocrity, it might not to other areas. And we've been critical of the council in the past, and we've been critical of the community board, and we've been critical of our councillor. And we might have had good reasons at the time, but the truth of the matter is we value having a councillor and board members who work hard to protect our interests. We know that they do. And we need to keep it like that and to work on it and to make that system better. We need those people to be listened to more within the corridors of this building. So I picked up the Akaroa Mail yesterday, and there's an advertisement in the Akaroa Mail where you're advertising for a governance advisor for the Banks Peninsula Community Board. And it says that the person will be at the forefront of local governance decision-making in a fast-growing, diverse and exciting community. I mean, I don't know who writes this stuff, but because we would not have used those adjectives perhaps, But anyway, this person is going to be supporting elected member decision-making to build strong communities. Well, we already have a strong community. We want this council to accept that and to help us to keep it that way. And having a strong community board that's focused on our area is the way to do that, in our opinion. So we don't want the existing community taken to pieces and remoulded. We want to keep what we've got and to build on that. So what's different about our community that justifies the proposed makeup of the Banks Peninsula Community Board? Well, firstly, there's the distinct nature and historical nature of the peninsula communities and how our aspirations and ideas, they do truly differ from the urban communities. There's the rural nature of the peninsula, how modern farming and land management practices are changing and what that means for the community and how that interacts with the city. Tourism, it's a big thing on the peninsula, becoming a bigger thing, but it's a threat as well. It's a looming threat. And the way it gets handled on the peninsula is quite different to the way that you'll be wanting to handle it in the city. There's the impact of terrain, distance, driving times and so on. It just does take quite a while to get around out there. And there's basic principles of equity and fairness. I know you were talking earlier about the different pay rates and so on. We don't see why somebody doing the same job, in effect, should have a different pay rate. We don't think that's fair at all. And so we want to encourage you to promote some true recognition of the unique nature of the peninsula and its communities and the important contribution that we are able to make to the Christchurch city. So we support the proposal as it stands in the discussion document, and we will work with you to try and do even better than that.
So some of the councillors would prefer to see it come into the ward to be merged with either one or two of the wards that sit within the city. And you've heard some of the submissions here this afternoon that have essentially reflected the same thing. What's the counter to that? What would be the disadvantage of doing that?
Well, I think from our point of view, you might as well not have a ward system at all. We would lose. We would feel that our sense of representation was completely lost, and we would just be totally drowned in the 400,000 people that you have here in the city.
Okay, Sarah.
Thanks so much. I'm just wondering, there's been a number of submissions, not just in this process, but over a period of time, where people in Banks Peninsula have expressed concern about the lack of understanding in the urban area of Banks Peninsula. And I'm wondering if that could be partly because we have kept it separate for so long, and we've only had a very small number of people who are separate representing it, instead of it being more integrated with more members, so that everyone has a fuller understanding and responsibility for Banks Peninsula. Given that, especially like on the Port Hills areas, we've got similar issues as across with the conservation and the community groups doing that kind of work as well.
Yes, the Port Hill areas are obviously tied a little closer to the city than Akaroa and the far side of the peninsula, which is the area that I speak for. I can see there's some validity in what you're suggesting there, But on the other hand, I think that's outweighed by the distinct nature of Akaroa and the distance out to the far end of the peninsula, and where it gets, it is truly remote from the city.
Yeah, but you don't see that same difference for the Littleton Harbour? Because
No, I
it's
don't.
very
No, I don't.
much more connected, isn't it?
No, I don't see the same difference, because you've got a lot of people commuting from the Littleton area into the city,
Diamond Harbour
backwards
even.
and forwards all day,
Yeah.
And we have people out our end of the peninsula who come into town once a month,
That's
maybe.
it. Yeah. Thank you.
James, did you have a
just,
question?
just quickly. Kia ora, Harry. The Mayor has mentioned it, but, there are some people, even people sitting around here, that are considering or asking the question, why should Banks Peninsula be separate, full stop? You've explained why you think so, but how do you feel about the fact that other people in wards in the city, in the greater city, they've got one representative for 25,000 people, and you've got one representative for 9,500?
I think a lot of people, and I've lived in cities, I've lived in this one, I think a lot of people in the city have very little interaction with the council at all. The council doesn't have much impact on their lives, and so having what appears to be a lower level of representation is probably not that important to them.
Council has a great impact on their lives, and especially in the city with all the infrastructure.
But the infrastructure sort of happens all around them. It's just sort of happening all around them, and they're not really involved in that.
Yeah.
That's my take on it.
Okay, well then, my response to that is, don't worry, they know how to get hold of us. Okay, so they do. But as I say, it's just it's odd for some people to see it as one councillor for 9,500 people, as against one councillor for 26,000.
Yes, I can see that it looks odd.
Look, thank you very much for making your submission and for presenting to us in person. It does make a difference, so we do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, so that's the end of the submissions for today. So in terms of this particular meeting, I shall adjourn